I've been at Walter Payton for 3 years, and I can't deny that I am proud to be a Walter Payton College Prep student. It's an accomplishment to get in, but the one thing I don't think that anyone here likes about Payton is that it's too competitive. That hardly any people really do anything other than homework and studying, except maybe a few extracurriculars if you're lucky, and it's hard to make friends because everybody's too busy working. After all, everybody at Payton comes from a lot of different places all over the city. We've always prided ourselves on this diversity, and in fact, we are a lot more diverse than we act like we are. But here's the problem with that. Diversity is the opposite of unity. Now, I'm not saying that we should be an all-white school. I don't think anybody wants to go to one of those. If they did, there's plenty of private schools that are just like that. But what I am saying is that we don't need to focus on what separates us. We need to focus on what brings us together. Maybe a black kid and a white kid and an Asian kid and a Hispanic kid and a Middle Eastern kid will see each other in classes, but never outside of that because they've been segregated so much. In fact, the groups that tie the most different kinds of people together in terms of background are identity groups. And I don't need to tell you why those will not work for uniting the entire student body. I'm not saying we should get rid of them because your identity is an important part of who you are. And they are a thing that unites people, and the whole thing that I'm trying to say is that we need more of those. What I am saying, though, is that we need something better. Maybe something that everyone's a part of, not just people who are part of the group. I like the idea of this traditional, stereotypical, everybody's getting behind the football team, American school spirit that you see at the stereotypical American high school. But this ain't a good idea for these 3 reasons. First of all, it puts the football players or the basketball players or whoever on a pedestal. If everybody worships them and goes to their games, they're going to end up being the kings of the school. And I don't want anybody to be the king of Payton. We should all be our own kings. The second problem is, because we come from all over the city, for some of us, it takes like an hour and a half to get there. And of course, most of us don't have cars or somebody to drive them. So, if we have a game that's far away from Payton, a lot of people aren't going to be able to come. It's that simple. And this is true for almost all sports. Even sports that do have games at Payton, that's still a bit of a stretch. And number 3, even if everything was perfect, even if you lived right by Payton and there was still a sporting event at Payton that you could go to right after school, there's a good chance you still wouldn't be able to do it because you had some kind of work, because that's what Payton is. Another main drawback, in my opinion, of Payton sports is that there are a lot of white people. And all you have to do to notice that is look at a poster for the basketball team or the volleyball team, or just the fact that we have an ice hockey team. Now, before you start thinking, is this guy just going to say something else about institutionalized racism? Well, it probably is because of that, but that's another TED Talk. So, basically, synopsis for me is, the reason for this is because if you're a Tier 1 student, you don't have enough access to things outside of academics, and you probably just focused on being the smartest. Being the smartest was your identity. So you were the smartest in your class, so you studied hard, and you went to Payton. On the other hand, if you're a Tier 4 student, then you can do really well in school, and your family also has the resources to make you something else too. So what ends up happening is a lot of guys come to Payton as really smart guys in something else from Tier 4, but there's nobody really like that from the lower tiers. And the problem with this is that, well, I'm sure you guys could think of plenty of problems with it, but people want to cheer on their friends. And your friends are the people you hang out with. So, if kids from Tier 1 don't see any other kids from Tier 1 that they usually hang out with on the field, they're not going to cheer for them, and they're not going to care. and that's one less connection that they have. So sports aren't necessarily the best way to do this. They could help, they can play some kind of role, but they're not everything. Even at Lane Tech, they're a big school, and a lot of people know that they have a strong sense of school spirit. Sports play some kind of role in getting people to connect with each other, especially between freshmen, but they're not everything. And that's the way it should be. If you don't like to go to sporting events, that's okay. We don't want to force you. Peyton is an individualist culture, and what that means is we like to let everybody do their own thing. If you compare individualist Peyton to a school in some place a bit more collectivist, a good example that I'm going to be using for this is Japan, you're going to see a lot of really big differences. The typical school classroom in Japan has around 50 people in a room. They're all wearing school uniforms, and they're all listening to the teacher lecturing. They all study really, really hard. The hardest working student at an American school is just average in Japan. There's almost no intellectual discussion between student and teacher or between student and student. The only thing you do in class is just whip through all of the assigned material so you can pass the entrance exam and get into a good college. Learning comes in second. For example, the average Japanese student can read English at a really high level because that's what's on the exam. But if you said hello to them, they wouldn't really understand what you were saying. This is exactly the kind of thing that a lot of the students and a lot of the teachers at Peyton want desperately to avoid. Now, and we've taken a lot of steps to get rid of this. Now, I really don't want to sound like I'm bashing Japan here. These are their cultural values, and that's what's really important to them. The reason I'm saying this is because it's important to contrast what's important to them to what's important to us. And a key part of this Japanese system is the standardized test. It's the only method of determining who gets into what college. There are no other factors considered. So pretty much all Japanese students have no choice but to obsess over it. And when you get down to it, Peyton isn't that different from this. And it's even less different when you focus on the period before Peyton, 7th and 8th grade. So in 7th and 8th grade and in Peyton, people stress a lot over what college they're going to get into, and that comes at a cost. Everybody's physical and mental health. Like, for example, name one person who's getting a good 8 hours of sleep a night. This isn't exactly a secret, and I'll give the administration of Peyton a lot of credit. They've done a lot of very good work to help make everybody's lives less stressful. But this is a good first step, but although having these things helps a lot, they can only do so much since the ultimate source of the pressure is from within the students themselves or maybe from their families. Of course, I don't want Peyton students to not be hardworking. I just don't want them to kill themselves or work too much harder than they need to. I want to tell them, if you guys get a B or a C, it's not the end of the world. But that's a hard lesson for them to swallow. And that was a hard lesson for me to swallow. And yeah, that's a tale that all the incoming freshmen know about. Especially because if they were in Tier 4 or Tier 3, if they got 1B, they're not getting in. It's that simple. And even as we do let more and more people in, the scores that you need to get into Peyton just get higher and higher and higher. This arms race of test prep for the next generation is only going to intensify. And before you say that principal's discretion might end up changing things, remember that only about 10 students per year get in based on principal's discretion. So how do we make Peyton a better and less stressful place to learn? Maybe instead of picking people based on grades and test scores, we should focus more on the whole person. That would work great in theory, but what it essentially would be is expanding the whole process of principal's discretion. And the process is so airtight that you can't really do it for thousands of people. Another reason why it wouldn't work is the possibility of rich people making donations and politicians calling in a few favors to get their kid in. And I'm saying this because it's happened before. Bruce Rauner's daughter went to Peyton despite the fact that she didn't have the grades to get in and she didn't live in Chicago at the time. So change has to come from within Peyton. It has to start as early as possible so that we can help as many people who come in as possible. What I personally believe that we should do is have a period of time, a grace period, from the beginning of the year to homecoming where there's no homework at all, or at least no homework for freshmen. Maybe for some AP classes this is an unreasonable request, but at least a partial ban, a partial grace period would help, or maybe a ban for a shorter period. What this will do is help freshmen to build social connections and also help them develop the idea that you don't have to be the best in the world. Also, not to mention that it'll help transition into a school sleep schedule and it'll improve people's mood and make them less stressed. To create students that are socially well-rounded and mentally healthy, it is important to tackle both of the two biggest issues facing the average Peyton student: the amount of pressure they are under on a daily basis and the lack of social connections that they have. These issues are tied to each other. If you reduce the pressure on the average student, they'll feel more free to socialize and improve their relationships with other students. If they help people build connections, it'll help them deal with stress as a group better and make them focus on helping each other, not outperforming the classmates. And I really do think that a grace period will help me, and not me, help all of Peyton to achieve this. That's something that's important to you, I know, and that's something that's important to me.